I was seeking comic originality and fame fell on me as a byproduct is not something that I said, but that Steve Martin said in his autobiography, Born Standing Up. I used to look at comedians and be like, oh, that's not so hard. I can make people laugh. It takes so long to get really good being on stage and making people laugh. And this is why I found Steve Martin's book so refreshing, is doing completely random stuff, dancing and singing the weirdest, most outrageous songs. And he was a pioneer in the field, and he did change the face of comedy in the 60s and 70s. He actually says that this book is not so much an autobiography, but more of a biography, because it was him writing about someone who he used to know, which was the younger version of himself. And I found this very profound because anybody who's in your 40s or 50s or 60s, even 70s, and we look back on the younger versions of ourselves, that is a completely different person. And Born Standing Up has that entire vibe of it's Steve Martin looking back on the younger version of himself, and this is a book about letting go. In this book breakdown, we're just gonna jump right into the main lessons of the book, and then I'm gonna share some of the contrarian takes and the things that I didn't like so much about this book, and some actionable takeaways that we can learn from Steve Martin and apply in our lives today. Let's get into it. The book takes a little bit of time to get going, but he starts early on finding his passion in childhood. It's so exciting when somebody finds their passion and their purpose at such a young age, and then they go on and master it, and he does that. And then we kind of follow his progression where he's struggling to make it, empty clubs, nobody laughing, trying to make them laugh, doing the weirdest, most outrageous stuff that he can think of. And he has this absolutely amazing quote about his overnight success. I did stand-up comedy for 18 years. 10 of those were spent learning, 4 years were spent refining, and 4 years were spent in wild success. We always hear about this overnight success, and even more so today with social media, and we see these massive rises to fame and popularity, but in reality, it takes about a decade to get really, really good at something, and then even longer to perfect it and refine it. You are the only one standing in your way, and he proves this because he wasn't talented. He couldn't dance, he couldn't sing, he was terrible at comedy and wasn't funny, but he ended up becoming a huge success at all of those things. I once heard Sarah Blakely, the founder of Spanx, say that her biggest asset when she first got started in business was her naivety. She tells a story about Neiman Marcus and that she didn't know that you could just call them up and be like, hey, I'm coming in, I'm going to show you my product. Most people say you could never do that, but she didn't know any better, so she just made a phone call and then just showed up there one day and then showed the product. This just is something that Steve Martin says as well, is that a huge asset that he had was he was completely naive in the business. He had no idea what he was doing, but he embraced that. Despite a lack of natural ability, I did have the one element necessary to all early creativity: naivete. That fabulous quality that keeps you from knowing just how unsuited you are for what you are about to do. Being naive and not knowing what you're doing is actually a really good thing. I know personally, I try to embrace this all the time, especially when making content. I have no clue what I'm doing, but that's a good thing, because if I really did, then I would overthink it and overanalyze it. If you know too much or what you should do or what you shouldn't do in a certain area, you try to follow that format and stay in that mold, when in reality, the real creativity, the real art comes from breaking out of that mold and being naive. And on that same note, he has a similar part about being delusional. You need to be so delusional that you live in this alternate reality, that you believe that you are already successful, that you have already changed, that you have already made it. You need to believe that, because if you don't, you will just go back into the mold of your reality. Through the years, I have learned there is no harm in charging oneself up with delusions between moments of valid inspiration. He was on a different planet. He knew it. He just didn't care. He was focused on the art and just being so unique and so creative that whatever anybody else thought, including the audience, didn't matter. He even says that when the audience didn't laugh and he was bombing, he turned that into the act itself and made that part of it. Thankfully, persistence is a great substitute for talent. Pick a thing or a method or a system that works and then follow it and be persistent. It's so difficult to keep going, especially when you don't know if it's going to work or not. And we can never truly know if it's going to work or not. So you just have to keep showing up. And the best way to do that is be delusional. Know for sure that it is going to work. And then finally, that brings us to the end of the book. And this is where he decides to quit comedy. The big stadiums and the arenas, they just weren't working. And it was hard for him to walk away, but he knew it was the right choice. In psychoanalysis, you try to retain a discovery. In art, once the thing is made, you let it go. And this is exactly what Steve Martin did with his comedy career. I gave this one a 3.5 stars, good. It wasn't really great, especially when you're talking about some of the other memoirs or autobiographies that are out there. There are just so many top tier ones that are out there, and this just felt like a reflection. But he does have some good lessons in there about being ready to quit. He's a very good example of it's okay to walk away. We're always like, you need to persist, you need to keep going, don't ever quit. He's not any of that. He was just like, yeah, I nailed comedy and then I was done with it. Is it worth a read? Maybe. If you're looking for a late night read or something that's maybe not too stimulating before bed, this might be a good choice. And if you like these kind of book breakdowns that I do, you can check the link down below and you can get the deep dive book summaries, or you can just join my weekly newsletter where I share tips and tricks that you can use to apply to your life and start making changes. So grab the link down below and join for the weekly newsletter. Now, the things that I didn't like so much about the book, and this first one is kind of funny, maybe a little hypocritical, but success doesn't always have to be lonely. This book, he is extremely lonely through the whole process. Kind of hypocritical on my end because I'm sitting here in Thailand alone, and I came here alone, and I want to focus on my business alone. Maybe you have to be lonely in the beginning to really focus and get nailed down on the nitty-gritty, but then after that, it's important to get out there and network and meet people and help you grow. And if you want to get to the top or the next level, you must transition. And in that transition, you're going to have to be lonely for some time. Number two is maybe Steve Martin's success was because he was lucky. I think he just hit that perfect wave where comedy was looking for something new and something fresh, and he brought that. Timing is so important. Taking nothing away from him, he's had a massive, monstrous career. But again, there is luck involved in this, and he doesn't really talk about that in the book, and I think it's important to mention. Attributing a lot of our success to luck is probably important to recognize. My main argument of the book is that the book was just emotionally flat, and it's Steve Martin telling the story about his life. There's no really emotional moments. He ties a little bit of a bow on it at the end when he gets closure with his parents, but yeah, it's emotionally flat. As for the actionable takeaways, there are two. And the first one is really focusing on pre-success. And here's what he says. I just believe that the interesting time in a career is pre-success. What shaped things? How did you get to this point? We're always focused on getting somewhere else, but not in the moment we are in right now. You're going to be successful if you're persistent, but enjoy the mess, the pain, the struggle, the inability to get started, the procrastination, the self-doubt. It sounds ludicrous to actually enjoy those things. Those are the fun parts, because when you get to a certain point, like I did with comedy, I look back and I was like, man, that struggle of like sitting there writing, trying to figure out the joke or what was funny or how to do it, or the first times getting up on stage, I blacked out my first 5-minute set. Truly blacked out, don't remember any of it. But that's fun. That's the fun part, because later when it becomes like a routine and you're up there and you're just doing the thing to do the thing, you forget what it was like. You forget the struggle. Appreciate and journal about what parts of the struggle you actually enjoy the most. Number two, we don't hear this too often from celebrities, but he says this very important part about getting closure with your parents. If you have anything to work out with your parents, do it now, because one day it will be too late. Closure is so important for our brains. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. If we don't close loops, they stay open and our brain will run in the background, you know, looking for things or looking for ways to get closure. So make sure you close loops as much and as often as you can, and especially with your parents, because one day They will be gone, and you won't be able to say what you need to say. Here's a question you could use to help you find what you want to do for the rest of your life. If you knew you would never achieve any great success or financial reward, but you would still have just enough to survive and be okay, what one thing would you do? What's the one thing that you love the process of so much that you just want to learn more and improve at it? And this is a question I came up with because you might have heard the one of, imagine you had all the money, you didn't have to worry about money or anything. What's the thing you would do? And I hate that one because that's not realistic. It's just not going to happen, ever. We need to worry about money. And then the other one is imagine what's the one thing that if you knew you were going to fail, what would you do? And I don't like that one either because it just focuses on the failure. And this one focuses on what's the thing, you have just enough money, you have food, shelter, everything's covered. So hopefully where you are now in your life, what would you do then? And then the other part of that is, what do you want to improve at? What do you want to not be super awesome and famous and successful, but what do you personally want the skill of where you're like, damn, I'm happy I can do that. Ask yourself these questions and you can reveal so much about who you are, where you are, and where you want to go. This book has a very strong vibe of, let me see, what the fuck? Jeez, sometimes and we look back, we get to learn what that looks like for him. His family life and his kind of, how is this so hard? Born Standing Up by Steve Martin. I'll just stop it.